So, folks, we have, I think, the biggest rotation in Hearthstone's history coming very, very soon. And that's in large part thanks to the core set and all the changes to Classic and Basic. But also, we're losing some really, really important cards. Things that are absolutely meta defining and archetype building. And I want to showcase some of those cards and talk about the implications for how that affects the way classes and the meta is actually formed. Now, before we go on, I'd like to note that this video is sponsored by our friends at Keeps, which we'll talk about a little more later. But for now, let's jump into this list. So yeah, let's kick things off here with our good buddy Zephrys. I didn't really rank this video. It's going to be kind of random order, but I think Zephrys would be a pretty clear number one if we had to rank the most impactful cards leaving Standard, just because he's been the core fundamental piece for Highlander decks. Like, yeah, Dragon Queen Alexstrasza is there. There are some class-specific minions as well for Saviors of Voldoom, but nothing's been as important as Zephrys, just because he's that perfect answer to every board state. He's lethals, he's board clears, he's early game tempo. Whatever you need for the matchup, Zephrys feels like the exact right card in every scenario as he is designed. And although, yeah, he's been a little wonky sometimes here and there, missing lethals and doing weird stuff and not being as reliable as we want, he still works the vast majority of the time, and that's why Highlander decks have been an important part of the meta ever since Zephrys was printed. So clearly losing these Highlander enablers, and I don't know if we're going to get more or not. I think personally I'd kind of like a break from Highlander decks for like a year or two. But for now, Zephrys leaving means we're losing the era of Highlander as far as we know, because this guy is really what made it possible. So next up, let's just get through this real quick. Dragon Queen Alexstrasza, basically all the same stuff as Zephrys, except not quite as good, but still has been an important part of Highlander decks, particularly in her pre-nerf state. She was absolutely insane, either discovering herself or getting zero-cost dragons. Like, that made Highlander even crazier for a little while there in the Descent of Dragons era, but even outside of that, still getting played in a handful of different decks. So Alexstrasza is kind of a footnote to Zephrys in a way, but still I think had to be recognized as one of the most important meta definers just because of her influence again on Highlander decks. So next up here, we got Evil Miscreant for Rogue. And really, this is almost more synonymous with like the Lackey era of Hearthstone. Lackeys have been such an enormous part of how Hearthstone is played because of their various resource generation applications. It seems like everybody constantly has full hands if they have lackeys in their deck, and Rogue in particular, with all the different bounce effects and stuff, they just have a billion cards, which of course limits things like Control Deck's ability to just go toe to toe and deny you of resources, so on and so forth. So Miscreant has clearly been, I think, the leading impactor here for a lackey style world. Because he's just such a strong card, solid body, plays really well into other lackeys like Goblin and in particular Witchy Lackey as well. And with Rogue bounce effects, this guy just goes absolutely crazy. Remember, he also used to be a 1/5, which is kind of nuts to think about these days because he's still really, really good as a 1/4 and features prominently in tons of different Rogue decks. So I think a pretty important change here with Miscreant and the lackey cards beyond it. All right, so Evil Miscreant's not the only evil in this video. I think my hair is going evil lately too. It's gotten really, really big, which on that note, it's a good time to talk about our sponsor for this video. It's Keeps. So if you didn't know, 2 out of 3 guys will experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they're 35. And man, that number is only like a little over a year away. And thankfully, I know the best way to prevent hair loss is to do something about it while you still actually have hair left. If it's gone, it might be too late. If you're still rocking crazy evil hair like yours truly, you might have a shot. And the cool thing is with Keeps, you can get treated right from home. You don't have to go to a doctor's office. You can just talk to one online and they get your Keeps sent right to your house, making it just about as easy and convenient as possible. So if you've noticed that you're losing your hair, do something about it. For a limited time, go to keeps.com/Regis or click the link down there in the description below and you'll get 50% off your first order. So moving right along here to Ray of Frost for Mage. And this one has really been, I think, an enabler for lots of different small spell mage decks, just because it's a 2-in-1 1-mana spell, which played really, really nicely off of things like Sorcerer's Apprentice and enabled a ton of stuff off of a mana cyclone as well, and even cheesing things like Mozaki. Having cheap spells like this goes a really long way for those styles of decks too. So really the twin spell aspect of having such a cheap mage spell was kind of the fuel for various different engines that Mage was able to play off of very successfully. So losing a card like Ray of Frost is definitely going to limit how much Mage can play off of these like crazy cycle turns with a ton of super cheap spells. Now, naturally, they're also going to lose Sorcerer's Apprentice in the core set, which those kind of go hand in hand. But losing that engine and this fuel is absolutely going to change what Mage looks like to some extent, I think. So Ray of Frost was just an absurdly powerful card because not only did it give you those cheap cycles, but it locked down your opponent's board in many cases as well. So it limited their ability to actually interact and change and do anything on those big spiky crazy turns you had, making it this like doubly powerful card. Also just good in a vacuum sometimes. 2 freezes was nuts to slow down your opponent's pressure while you're doing whatever other game plan. That's why Ray of Frost, I think, has been probably the most important card for Mage over the last year or two. It's been really, really reliably good across so many different archetypes. Next up here is Lightforged Zealot, the pure Paladin enabler here, alongside Lightforged Crusader and actually Yrel now. But with Zealot rotating, it does feel like Yrel in particular might be a little bit stranded as a pure type card. I don't know if it's going to be worth it to run pure Paladin just for Yrel. I think Lightforged Zealot in particular was really the most important card for the pure archetype, or at least the reason to run the pure archetype, because this feels really good. True Silver Champion was already a great card, so getting one with a 4/2 for free is just amazing. And Paladin had so many good cards, it wasn't hard to run pure decks. That's why we saw Pure and Pure Libram Paladin be really important forces in the meta. Seems like Libram Paladin has definitely shifted more to the kind of Broom and Pinflinger style as of late, but this remains a relevant archetype and for a long time felt like a very, very powerful and reliable deck, especially at lower ranks. I think when you looked at the data for this one, anybody playing in like bronze through gold or maybe even platinum would just see a ton and a ton of pure Paladin in its prime. Something like, I think 30% of decks were pure Paladin. So it was absolutely everywhere for a while, largely in part to the strength of Lightforged Zealot being just a ridiculous turn 4 tempo play. Moving on here to Phase Stalker, and clearly a card we've seen a lot in Hunter. It is being played in like Highlander Hunters. It's also been in really aggressive Hunters because it does something really cool, I think, which is allow you to run secrets in your deck and often utilize things like secret synergy cards, whether that's just as simple as Eaglehorn Bow or other more powerful things as well, without necessarily ruining your deck's consistency by having a ton of secrets that you have to draw into. Because nobody really wants to draw and play secrets that readily. You kind of want to cheat them out, and Phase Stalker allows you to do that while also being a beast and a reasonably statted minion, and also getting to hero power, which you don't hate doing anyway. A combination with cards like Tour Guide in particular can create some pretty crazy early game tempo on the back of Phase Stalker cheating out secrets, but it also becomes an interesting mid-game play as well. So this has been a very, very vital card for Hunter and establishing those early game strong, powerful plays, which is why we've seen things like Highlander Hunter and Aggro Hunter be very, very important decks over the last year or two, thanks to Phase Stalker, which I have to admit, I thought this card would be too slow. I thought spending 4 mana in total for this would be a problem. Tour Guide certainly fixed that to some extent, but even at 4 mana, it's often still a pretty darn powerful play and works really nicely for these decks. So a card I missed on in particular, but one that has been, I think, very, very important for Hunter. Okay, so next up here is Risky Skipper. Really crazy high output card here for Warrior. I'm still surprised just how much this card does for 1 mana. It's absolutely crazy the kinds of things it enables. Number one, it can clear boards from your opponent if they have a bunch of small stuff. Just drop your Risky Skipper and wipe it out with a couple minion follow-ups. It can do crazy armor turns with cards like Armor Smith and even duplicating your Armor Smith with Bloodsworn Mercenaries so that you get like 20, 30 armor in a single turn. That's been crazy. It's also just a really reliable activator for Battle Rage, and Battle Rage being the card draw tool minion rage style warriors utilize. to great success. So all of that is driven around Risky Skipper. And when you have Ankar in the meta alongside Risky Skipper, which increases your reliability to draw your Risky Skipper and make sure you actually have that resource in hand, this becomes a card that is really powered single-handedly almost a few different Enraged Warrior metas over the last year since it was released in Galakrond's Awakening. A lot of people ask me, like, how do I play this deck without Risky Skipper because they don't have Galakrond's Awakening? And the answer is really just you can't. Like, there's a lot of decks that just have to have Risky Skipper to work. That's just the fundamental building block for the deck. And for a 1-drop, that's kind of crazy just how good this card has been. I would say particularly at the upper echelons of Hearthstone, really high legend level players are able to utilize these Enraged style decks very, very successfully because of all the complexity they can really narrow in on the right plays to make. And Risky Skipper has been a huge part of that and very defining at the high level and tournament meta level as well. This card is kind of bonkers in hindsight for 1 mana. Maybe not even in hindsight. I've been saying that for a while, but it's just a totally crazy strong card. So next up, this one's going to be pretty quick and simple, but Tip the Scales has technically been really, really meta defining as of late, thanks to Ramp Paladin in combination with High Abyss Allura, cheating this thing out into play way too soon, just overwhelming your opponent with this board of crazy Murlocs and various other strong ramp style follow-up cards if this doesn't perchance stick, which it often would, and just win the game. Ramp Paladin pre-nerf to Allura was just absolutely dominant and everywhere, and even post-nerf still remains a competitive and viable deck, even though I certainly don't see it as often. But it's worth noting that with this rotating, that does go away. I thought we might see Allura unnerfed. Maybe we still could. I don't know as we lose this card. But still, you know, pretty simple one. It's a single card, but it was absolutely deck and meta defining for a while. So having it rotate is, in fact, noteworthy. So next up here is Archmage Vargoth. And, you know, when you think about Vargoth and like the things he's been able to do and the styles of play he's enabled, I don't think anything like really shoots to mind as like the most dominant or most oppressive, but he's just been all over the meta for 2 years and he pops into various lists here and there, often about cheating out some crazy big spells. So most recently, he's being played in like big decks like Dual Paladin and Big Warrior to help cheese out like an extra commencement or an extra duel when you summon him and he survives. That can be a pretty crazy play in those decks. But that's not all he's done. He's popped into a handful of various other lists along his lifespan as well. So I thought Vargoth, you know, even if he's not like top of mind, he's still a really powerful and sometimes very frustrating card when he's cheesing out really crazy big plays. Not to mention anytime he's like randomly summoned, how important and game-changing he can be in those scenarios. So I thought Vargoth deserved some recognition here, even if he's not like tier 1 meta defining at the moment, still a really, really important card over the last couple metas of Hearthstone. All right, and finally here, I'm kind of cheating a little bit. Galakrond is number 10 here, or the final one. Again, no order, but all the Galakrons. I only put 2 up here because I'm super lazy and didn't want to pull all the pictures, but basically every Galakrond is rotating, and clearly they've all at one time or another been really, really impactful cards. Galakrond for Shaman was just like totally insane until it got nerfed right off the bat in Descent of Dragons. And, you know, Galakrond for Priest has been popping into all kinds of different control lists. Just even if you don't have invoke cards, it's just a great way to generate endless value as you stretch on into a control matchup. Galakrond Warlock's been solid across various metas. Galakrond for Rogue's been really important, even getting nerfed. And even Galakrond for Warrior's been good too. We've had some Galakrond Warrior lists near the top of the meta as well. So really all 5 of the Galakrons have been a big deal. And of course, they're all rotating. And we don't know what that means for hero cards. We're going to have like Lord Jaraxxus, I guess, in the core set at least. We may get more from Forge and the Barons. We'll find out. But without all these hero cards, that definitely changes what the meta can look like. And clearly, these are all build-around style cards with the invoke aspect. So going to be a big deal not having these. Priests in particular losing access to that infinite value generator of Galakrond feels like it could be a really big deal because it was kind of a freebie they tossed into so many different lists. So it'll be curious to see how Priests adjusts without access to their Galakrond. The rest are more kind of like focused build-arounds. I guess Galakrond for Warriors sometimes gets tossed in as like a damage piece where you just get damage repetitively at the end of the game. But mostly you're going to be losing specific decks and then Priest in particular is going to be losing a really good card as well. So it'll be very curious to watch those unfold as they adapt to losing access to these Galakrons. So that said, I think that wraps it up here for this video. I'm sure I missed a card or two that you think was absolutely super duper important over the last year or so of the Hearthstone meta, and or 2 years really, all the way back to Rise of Shadows. So share your thoughts on that in the comments below. If there's a card you think is going to be super duper important, list it. Tell me why. I want to hear all those thoughts and more. If you think one of these is no big deal, share that too. Always curious to get your insights down there in the comments below. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Keeps, for sponsoring yet another video, and thank you guys for supporting them because they keep renewing more and more sponsorships. So shout out to everybody there, and thanks as always for watching, and until next time, game on.